Welcome to She Blaze, where we're bringing you cannabis culture from a woman's point of view. And as always, here to elevate the cannabis industry. I'm one of your hosts, Ice Dawson, Cannabis Socialite.
And I am Dasheeda Dawson, the WeedHead.
Hey, WeedHead.
Good morning.
On today's episode of She Blaze, our cannabis tea is hot off the press. We are following up on High Times Money Moves, and we're having an honest discussion about diversity in cannabis.
A much needed discussion about diversity in cannabis, but it is so exciting to see some of the changes that are happening. And at the same time, it can be so frustrating because we've been working for these changes for so long. But let's just keep it rolling into our high of the week. And I'm very excited because we both kind of on the same wavelength, I feel like, with highlighting diversity in cannabis, right?
Right.
So I'm going to kick this off first. What my high of the week is the PIF brand, Plant Inspired Future. This is a minority owned CBD company in the space. Shout out to Landon Diaz, who is an attorney, and he actually has had a very long career in the cannabis industry, but he is the CSO, Chief Strategy Officer for Live PIF. And y'all know I do not like tea, but I am sipping on their ginger green tea that has 15 milligrams of CBD infused. I have it in my cup rather than my coffee. And it actually is a lot more refreshing and a better drink when we're on this show rather than coffee. It definitely is. It is Zen like, but I appreciate that it tastes good for the most part. It smells delicious, and that it's USDA organic. And so, yeah, shout out to PIF. They also sent me. They have flower, CBD flower as well. So they sent me a CBD flower joint. And on that, I'm gonna definitely throw the mic to you and see what you got going on with your high of the week.
Well, my high of the week, I visited a CBD vape store that is Black owned in Atlanta, Georgia, off Panola Road, y'all, East Side.
Come through, y'all.
Yes, yes, yes. You know, I'm from Atlanta. And so it was really exciting being able to meet a woman of color that owns and operates the store, talk to her about CBD, hemp, and how she's even getting it wholesale, what it looks like, how to find and make sure these brands are reputable. And I actually purchased some hempettes for my dad. I don't smoke cigarettes. I'm trying to get my dad off the cigarettes, man. And so I was like, well, let's try hempettes. And so it does say on there that if you are doing a drug test, you might not want to use their product, even though it does have to have the percentage of low THC that they deem necessary. However, it's still hemp flower, so it's a low THC, but it's still gonna be some. It's not no THC. So I just want to make people aware of that. It's been popping up all over the place. It's called Wildflower Hemp Bets, and the CBD vape store is called Vape Stop.
That's what's up. I'm excited about what Georgia has going on. We've constantly been reporting out about the changes that has happened. They just announced their new head of the program there. And, you know, I think, of course, we were a little disappointed that he didn't have any previous cannabis experience, right? But at least to see that there are people taking advantage of the market, people of color, that's exciting for me. You know, it's that time, and we all should know what's going on with the cannabis industry. It's a lot bigger than just smoking some weed. And I want to say, just for the record, that that amount is 0.3% THC. So we're not even talking about a third of 1% of THC in the flower that is sold, the hemp flower that is sold. I love hemp flower, and you know, I've done my mixes for us here as a high of the week, so I definitely can't wait to get down there and try it.
Absolutely. Well, those wild hemps are pretty much sold at a lot of places. So it was really cool to see a woman of color be able to put it in even her store, because a lot of things we aren't always able to get in our store.
This is true. This is true. But you know what? That's why we're so lucky to be working in the industry where we get to travel and we get to do and see other markets. And we've definitely done the Oklahoma market, right? We kind of started it.
Right. So our hot topic number one is really, really near and dear to my heart because you was like, what if we get some land in Oklahoma? No, we not getting no land in Oklahoma, but we might need to though. Why?
Yes.
Because it's the largest, fastest growing market in the country as far as medical marijuana program. Yes, the Heartland is doing it, y'all. And they broke sales records for April and May. And because the governor deemed it as essential businesses, they allowed curbside pickup. And now they're estimating 270 million in sales for 2020.
That's amazing. I want to shout out Oklahoma because they're one of those small markets that could. We've been talking about them since 2017 is when I really started looking, and that's because they started discussing it being on the ballot in June of 2018. We did a CEASE conference there in February of 2018, and it's been on and popping ever since. I'm very proud of the work that we've put in Oklahoma. I still get contacts from people in Oklahoma related to the conference. So I think that we made a very lasting impression, and some of the media that we were able to put out there and remind people that this is medicine first. And we're seeing that happen now. One of the things I will say is that it could be even bigger, right? They're thinking it could go, up to 700 million. There's just nearly $1 billion in a year, which is definitely closer to what's happening here, right? And what's happening in Florida. These are really big medical marijuana population. So, but even more so, we're still not even fully penetrated, right? So imagine there's more out there. And then of course that got me thinking, I got to look up what Oklahoma's cannabis tax revenue is and where is that money going? And is that going to support, these communities that have been pretty much targeted due to cannabis prohibition. So I'm excited. Kudos to Oklahoma.
Yes, well, talk about it, be about it, because real talk, like some of these people, they need to understand Oklahoma is still considered a southern state. It is, there are a lot of people of color, despite what people think with the Tiger King, because y'all didn't really see no diversity in that. But
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of people in Oklahoma. There's a lot of rich history for people of color. So this is definitely an opportunity. Remember, we were watching Married to Medicine, LA, and Dr. Imani's husband was starting a dispensary in Oklahoma. So we do know that it seems more lucrative than California. This man was in California, and he's like, Oklahoma market seems way more viable. People are literally drowning in California. Let me see what it looks like to go there. And he did, and he's setting his up shop. And so it's pretty dope that people of color are even willing to travel to Oklahoma to set up shop.
That's a good point. I'm glad you reminded me because I did forget that Dr. Imani's husband is got a cannabis shop, and she was celebrating because they were both in Essence magazine. And shout out to them. Talk about power coupling. You do what you got to do. You can do what you got to do. I feel like that's me and you right now, Ice. Doing what you got to do. I got to do what I got to do out west. But I'm excited to when you finally get back out to the West Coast, and we'll be able to really go visit a few of these markets and see how they're doing. I definitely want to check out Dr. Imani's husband's dispensary because that means we already know something out there that is already Black owned. So let's go ahead and do some research and digging. I know you'll find it.
Definitely. I mean, the thing about, I think I'm probably just going to be bi-coastal shawty forever because, like, I love, like, forever I do love Atlanta. Hung out, had amazing weekend, and it was beautiful Black people hanging out, doing the things that we do. And do you want to know? Everybody was smoking and the police was chilling. The police was not harassing not one person. We had like two Karens because gentrification is real. Okay. Two Karens come out talking about the noise and the smell. And they was like, well, man, we can't do nothing about it. And so that is the type of things I love to hear. So I'm still excited about that. And we got a lot of Karens making complaints, Karens and Kens making complaints. And so hopefully it'll move us to our second hot topic, which is still juicy.
Okay, bring it.
Well, Tilray, which the cannabis industry celebrated, they celebrated for Tilray getting on the exchange and becoming a publicly traded company. It was a huge deal. I remember looking at the picture and we was like, where is the raisin?
There wasn't.
Right. But it is a Canadian based company, I believe. And so they actually have a lawsuit against their C-suite at the moment. So some of their shareholders have recently filed a lawsuit against Tilray's C-suite. Basically, they do what all these stock Wall Street guys do. They are they're basically insider trading. They're inflating their stock prices. They're making promises, but underperforming. So the Authentic Brands Group that is based in New York City basically said that they are owed a bunch of millions of dollars for unspecified milestones for Tilray with developing, marketing, and consumer cannabis products. And so they want the cash in.
Where's my money, right? I read this and I was just not tickled, but this is part of the challenge with thinking that you are like, you don't need diversity, right? Because there are just, and I mean diversity even in thought. Tilray is one of the children companies to Privateer Holdings, which is a rather like large cannabis conglomerate holding company, one of the first. And they also, last time I checked, also held Leafly, and they held the Marley Natural brand, which a lot of people got a lot of not so great things to say about the brand itself. And when I did get a chance to try the flower, I'll be honest, it wasn't necessarily my favorite, but again, not a lot of flower in California on the legal market was my favorite. So I'll just say it was
post-legalization.
Yes, it was definitely up to snuff for the legal market with Cali. So yeah, I think that we're going to have to watch to see how this unfolds, because I feel this is an example of what happens when there isn't enough diversity of thinking. And diversity of thinking, first and foremost, starts with different experiences. Those privateer men, the three that started, have a very, in my experience, similar background, and just my understanding. I've gotten a chance to meet the CEO of Privateer while I was in Vancouver, actually. And I was interviewing for the CMO position. But the reality—
15 years ago. No, I'm just kidding.
it felt like it was. That's what exactly what I was about to say. That was like 50 years ago. It was 84 long years.
Okay.
It was when I first entered the industry. I didn't know no better. I was coming from big companies as well. And so this was a bigger company, and they had a title that made sense for where I was in my career. And so I went after it, and I got to have a sit down. And, it was a little bit crazy. There was no follow-up. It was, like a typical, very small, a startup, but it was a startup, and I had to remind myself. And furthermore, it was cannabis, and there's an element of people feeling almost a little indignant in cannabis about once they're in it, and like, if you don't know or realize that you're doing something wrong and not willing to correct it, then you truly don't care about the plant itself and the patients, or the people. You care about the paper, and that's it. That's a quote right there. I'm gonna be real.
Hello. I mean, we know what these big cannabis companies really care about. And I don't even know if it's paper. It might be digital, because all they little investments is stocks. They ain't no cash.
Care about points.
Okay. Like, can we feel the money? So yes, we do have to stay on top of it. But this is big cannabis, and people just don't get it. outside of these outside of these legal markets, people just aren't really understanding the type of kabillions that these people are investing and losing, even to a certain extent. I think they overpromise things because they feel like, oh, I could just nudge this 70-year-old lawmaker and he's gonna move how I want him to move. And it's like, first of all, he mad old. So like you gonna have to nudge him a little bit harder, or we just gonna have to get somebody new. Like that's
Or
really
they think that they're going to get the brothers from the hood, if you will, to just come run into their stores because we just are retarded for weed. That's the part that it's the double-edged sword. It's us recognizing that we're moving to pretty large objects of populations, right? Ones that control the law and the law enforcement and all the rest of us, and definitely specifically within the cultured community and the colored communities. I definitely feel like whether it's Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, there is this overwhelming like hate for cannabis. I mean, again, you could get 10 years to life in Thailand if you get caught with a couple nugs. And now they're like, oh my goodness, we realize it's medicine.
let me drop it in your mouth in the hospital.
And let me get free in the hospital.
Okay.
Meanwhile, we have our folks up here in North America that have decided that they're going to capitalize the hell out of the plant, which means that we are really skipping over some really crucial steps to make sure that we have solid businesses. Because everything that is happening with Tilray means that it puts all of the products that Tilray makes, which by the way are not bad products. They're very well done and they're very high level, almost pharmaceutical grade level products. I appreciate the thought is happening in that, but the diversity of thought and that is required to really reach the consumer was not at all in their C-suite and hasn't been for the entirety of their time, and it's showing, right? Because I feel like these these practices are ones that we've typically, as Black women in business, I've stayed away from. Why? Because if something go wrong, guess who is going to be buried under the under the wrong, and that is going to be the woman of color.
Right.
I'm good.
Right. Ain't nobody trying to get 6 feet from that.
No.
But really, honestly, right. We're moving on to our third hot topic because these big cannabis companies' slips are showing. So we're going to help them put their slip back together after we look at it first. And so High Times, they are really making some high flips right now. Like they flipping like drug dealers for real. So High Times Stock Exchange, they're trying to get listed public, and they have extended it past May to June 30th. Now, we also been following this story for a long time. So a couple episodes ago, we talked about High Times and Harvest Health, their acquisition that's supposed to happen and be closed because they ain't signed on no dotted line yet. By June, they're hoping by June 30th. Well, there's already been some revisions, girl. And that ain't even the hot topic. That ain't even the hottest topic. It's been some revisions. They've dropped it down from 13 to 10. I've heard 9 to 8. And we can't get no official statements on nothing. And honestly, the investors' emails you're getting, they are just like marketing spam mail.
Yes. Oh my God. Let's talk about it. You can tell that you don't have anybody in charge that knows how to do this. Sorry, High Times.
And they don't even look cute. It's like, why'd you send me this? You could have kept that in MailChimp.
It's very bro. It has no branding in it, and it's just spam. I wish it would go to spam. I hate to say it. I'm so, I want them to win. I did, but these moves are a little bit sus.
They are sus, especially when you're selling like pharmaceutical, hemp CBD, breath strips that's patented, and they look like this, and then it's like this random email. It's like watching an infomercial at 2 a.m. on your email, and it's not. So like I said, there are statements all over the place. They're saying there may be 3 to 5 stores that are operational, but honestly, a lot of the licenses they're acquiring are being planned. And they've acquired and closed the agreement with Red, White, and Bloom Brands, that is a Toronto-based company. And most people don't know this, but they're actually one of the leading hemp CBD products in the Midwest. And with this agreement, they are licensing rights with High Times to allow them to use and brand their medical and recreational dispensaries in Michigan, Illinois, and Florida. So there are, like, here's some more licenses. High Times also acquired 2 other dispensaries in North Cal, 530 Collective and Synergy. Oh, and I forgot. They've acquired a delivery service in North Carolina. So they really want to be your plug.
In North Carolina or
North Cali, sorry.
I was like, they're delivering CBD. I mean, shoot, that's a good idea. But okay, that makes sense.
Don't be telling nobody our ideas off. They gotta pay for these ideas, D.
It was the only one of the ones that you just said, and I'm like, as they acquire all these stores, this is a little scary, but
a lot of shit.
Surprising. It is, you know, I know this isn't even a juicy, but before you get to the juicy, I just got to say that this is this tactic that is used by a lot of companies when they don't want to do the work to be really corely competent in that particular area. You know, High Times knows events and brands and publications, not retail. And so the thought of them buying empty spaces, right, going through the licensing process from the beginning and then building up a space in that way is not, one, very practical for the money and the time, but it's not practical for what their expertise is. And what I can tell is that they're also, because they only do what I said from the door, they don't really have a strong expertise on how they're buying. The markets feel a little bit like they're, you know, predicting what everybody else is kind of predicting, but not looking in the places that they should be looking. This is all very, very interesting. So we got now delivery services, North Cal, we got 2 dispensaries, North Cal, an unknown number of dispensaries through the Harvest Health deal that's still not closed yet, but the North Cal deal is closed, right? And the one for the
the North Cal's deal is not closed.
Gotcha. The one for
still
Canada
in litigation
with the hemp CBD is closed.
The Midwest is closed because none of their stores even open either, probably.
Gotcha.
I mean, it is, I said North Carolina because I'm like, it is a world. First of all, I got these emails back to back to back. So I was like, oh, y'all want us to talk about you. Gotcha. And so then after reading all these things, I went into a rabbit hole and I'm like, why are they acquiring all these dispensary licenses that haven't even been planned or built into anything? I know their CEO that they just appointed, the second one this year, it comes out the retail space, but he comes out the investment retail space. And so we learn a little bit more and we're finding out that these investments, these acquisitions are all stock-based. Most of them are, for how much they're worth, not even half of it is cash.
So it's basically giving the previous owner stock in High Times, which is what they keep asking us to buy more of.
Right, and I'm not, but I will keep getting your emails. Thanks. So once I went down this rabbit hole, I'm like, gosh, who's selling all these licenses to High Times? Well, it is a very long story, but it also is a telltale of what happens in the cannabis industry, particularly around brick and mortars. So a equity program license holder has been in a battle for over 2 years with the Planning Commission just to get his store up and running, to turn around and find out that his partners have merged with Harvest Health and Harvest Health is getting acquired by High Times. They're getting licenses acquired by High Times, and so happened to be one of his stores that he finally got approval for. Yeah.
Wow.
And as somebody who is literally going to be next to a Chanel store, he hadn't realized it until they said that quote. Now, here's the tricky thing. He's basically, by law in San Fran, to be an equity program holder for cannabis, you have to have 40% of your shares of the company. Well, he only has 40% of the shares and he's the acting CEO. So you would think he would know. Well, honestly, it's through a whole bunch of mergers. Basically, his original business partners sold their shares to Have a Heart, which is a chain of dispensaries in Washington. And Washington chain dispensaries merges for 80 million with Harvest Health. No, 85 million, excuse me.
Wow.
85 million. And why it's so important is because Harvest Health is being acquired, having these dispensaries be acquired by High Times for 80 million. So all that just happened like within, is this what white boys do? Is
it 80 million in stock?
Well, some is stock based, most is the stock based, but some are just actual cash. There's like a milli in cash or something like that. Like, was it really discussed upon? Because I don't think they want us to know. That's the thing about cannabis media that's a little bit different from other like business insiders, because there's a lot more private communication on what they're willing to share with the media and what they're not. And because the media is not like, give me what you say, sir, and they're not like Michael Jordaning them with the mic. They actually have to like push a story. You don't get to get a lot of the good information that you would get if it was like Estee Lauder makeup line being merged with someone else.
Well, let me just quickly recap, because I think that you dropped a lot of key information to kind of see where this is like, okay, this is juicy. First and foremost, we have Mr. Bronson, who is basically an equity program participant. And, you know, shout out to San Francisco, because there's a woman of color who is running that office. And I definitely think, what'd you say?
It's a man.
It's a man? No, man running the dispensary. Yes. A woman of color running the office of cannabis program.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So yeah, I'm sorry. Again, I want to start over because I did not understand what I was saying. I was saying that there was a woman of color who was in charge of the city's program.
Oh, okay. You did. Oh,
yes. And so I was giving her a quick shout out before going into the fact that this man, Mr. Bronson, is part of a program that she runs, is part of an equity program. And I'm starting to get more and more less in love with the word equity, because I think people automatically means less than, or, you know, it's the new affirmative action, if you will. But that's aside. To recap, what's actually happening is that in order for him to actually get into this program, to get a license, he had to partner with people who had maybe more capital, maybe more resources. And in partnering with it, he gave up 60% of his business. And this is why it's so important that when we're building these laws around what does equity actually look like, we have to make sure that it means that you have the majority of your ownership, no matter how much capital or whatever the other person is bringing to the table. At the end of the day, he doesn't really have to be consulted because he is not really a majority owner. Based on what I'm just looking at, again, sheer numbers and votes of what would count. And that can be, of course, undone and written into an operating agreement to say that they have to vote all together, so you can solve it that way. But in this way, that is what made him most vulnerable, because my guess is that wasn't in their operating agreement. But if it was, Mr. Bronson needs to consult an outside attorney to make sure that he is getting covered in that way. Now, the partners who own 60% decided that they were going to make a getaway, right? Because he's not able to get into a store. He hasn't been making any money yet, no revenue. So they got away by selling their shares, and they sold their shares to a chain of dispensaries, right? That already are a group that exists, so they have money. And so we can't blame that partner group or whoever they are, that 60%, for wanting to get out. 2 years not able to really start up, Hope Wiseman talks about this all the time, is a very long time not to have your, you know, your business running when you put so much money into actually getting a license. That is a common issue with why there isn't diversity in the cannabis industry. And I know we'll get right into that as well. So now we have the new chain, and you said that's about a heart. What is it?
Have a heart.
Have a Heart. That's the chain. They decide to do a deal with Harvest Health. And as a result, now we're into the big business realm. So we went very quickly to what was a relatively small business opportunity, equity opportunity, to now we are in the big business. This exact chain is what we talk about on the East Coast as we are trying to build consensus over what these programs look like in, say, a New York. We know this is happening on the West Coast because it's been happening. And the only way to avoid it is to build in roadblocks. And the first one is ownership at the core. That Mr. Bronson, nothing can happen to his business without him being able to have a vote. Even if he only had 5% ownership, right? It should be all owners agree. And that would have stopped maybe even the purchase that happened in the initial play. But now, last step is Harvest Health in a big business, big cannabis to big cannabis deal that doesn't have, that's so far removed from Mr. Bronson, is now looking at giving a certain number of licenses over to High Times. So they're not being acquired by High Times. They're just giving their licensed dispensaries to High Times. They have many across the country. And it's only 13 was the first, and then it was 10, and it might be 8, and it might be 7 if Mr. Bronson is able to hold this up. Now, who has the power to stop some of this from happening? And that's why I started with the head of the Office of Cannabis for San Francisco. She has the power, at least in my opinion, or the influence to look at what the steps have been and see, does this actually pass our regulatory code as to what can happen in an equity program? And so I go back, and the reason why that's why I mentioned her full circle is it's so important to have people in those roles who really understand what the program is really meant to be, because it's been bastardized. And now in many ways, it's almost like he is a person who got into a sharecropping situation, and through a series of very intricate business moves, he is now back in a situation where he's kind of owned by the master again. And yes, in this case, High Times is the master. And I know people be like, what are you talking about? Well, when we look again at what their board looks like and what their C-suite looks like, especially with the swap out of Stormy Simon for the new CEO, we are talking about exactly why there's no diversity in cannabis. And I'll pause there. I gotta drop the mic.
Well, you definitely dropped the mic on us. You dropped some real facts, and I love the way you outlined it to some real historical past shit, because that did happen, and it's part of the reason why people of color actually don't have land. So I mean, like, what are we talking about right now? So thank you for, just keeping it a thousand, because it's true. And maybe he should really listen to your jewels that you dropped and reach out to the head of San Francisco, because it is unacceptable. He did say that if this was to happen, he'd be pulling his store out. So hopefully, more power to you, brother. But yes, it leads us into our main topic about diversity in cannabis, because there is just none. And when you hear about some of the things that, I mean, literally my head hurts talking about Tilray and then High Times, about all these moves and these money moves. And it's like, to know somebody that can't really even afford to pay for dinner because they work at a minimum wage job, not to be nothing funny, but dispensaries don't pay that much, and they expect you to tip them on top of that. So it's just no diversity. The only diversity you actually do see is kind of in the dispensary to a certain degree. That's
Yep.
as much brown
That's
as you'll
smoke
see
and
around.
mirrors too.
Okay.
We need
And
it there, but it's still smoke and mirrors.
yes. And right now there's a social outcry for just black owned, but I think black owned and operated too should be a little bit more of the outcry, because when we look at these different markets from different states, we honestly have so many statistics all over the place about who's black owned in this cannabis market, who's not, what's considered, how many percentages you have to have. So it is really it's really hard to like really find good information to get for this, because it's still like federally illegal and it's not legalized in every state, but it is very parallel with the Black Lives Matter movement. And Colorado actually, they're adding new license to a jurisdiction, and they have delivery and hospitality things that they're willing to weigh in, and they really are trying to put equity at the core of it, because they don't want us to get no license for brick and mortar. They want us to deliver and serve somebody with hospitality, but they want to have that license pool surrounded around equity. And it's really sad because there was a recent study that was done that like 75% of local cannabis businesses are white, and people that are identify as Hispanic or Latin are make up 13% of cannabis business owners. And in Denver right now, black people only make up around 6%. So this is a very, very small study. It's very niche, it's very confined, but it feels like these numbers are everywhere, right?
Yeah, we do have a problem with data in cannabis, and part of it is because it's being regulated by so many different agencies that also are looking for data for different reasons. When you go mining for data, oftentimes, especially if you are scientists, you will be thinking about your hypothesis as you're digging. And so you look for the data that supports what you think. And if you think cannabis is going to increase crime in a state or in a neighborhood that a dispensary is there, if you think that black people smoke cannabis at a much higher rate than white counterparts, whatever it is that you think, you will then try to sort and find data that is supporting that. But it's harder even still when you find that it's not the case, because then that's not the story you're really interested in telling. And then we get a lot of inflation so that people feel good about the story that they are telling. For example, I get tired of hearing about how many more women who are entrepreneurs in cannabis. It's very much almost like you would expect it's some 50-50 situation. It's not. We still are in the high teens, maybe low 20 in terms of women who are owners, but that is still better than in tech. That's still better than in some other areas. So yes, is it better? But we've got to also qualify that it's certainly not equity, it's not equal. And what we're finding with the situation as far as diversity in cannabis, I just explained what happens when we set up government regulatory programs that are meant to bring people in under a certain name, and we clearly get a more sharecropping situation because people just want to piggyback, and they're really prey to folks who understand business a bit more and have had experiences making certain maneuvers. But it's time for us to call that out, and I'm glad that we kind of did with what's going on with the High Times Harvest, Have a Heart, San Francisco
Who the
situation.
hell knows who the name is? Shit.
Exactly. But I also think we have to call out the origins of it. And the origins really start from the fact that we've been incarcerated the most, and the very early cannabis legalization laws on the books purposely said that you could not own or even be a license holder if you had these past things on your record. And so for a good chunk of the first portion of this, I would say even the first 10 years of what was happening in cannabis, we were purposely leaving out the very people that this was harming. So, you know, that to me is something we have to quickly rectify, because we purposely said, don't. No, we can't. And now we got states like Massachusetts, and now it's like, oh, you got to prove that you had this, right? As part of the criteria. And in some ways, that's a swing of the other pendulum. But what I really wish we would do a better job at is just really identifying those communities and going out and targeting and getting them into the door without having to call it a program publicly so much, you know, without having to label it, because it makes them, you know, in my opinion, subject to this treatment. The assumption that you don't know how to run a business, or the assumption that you can be railroaded, versus just having internal statistics that we track to make sure that we have diversity in our business community overall.
Right. And I feel like these programs scare people off, because there were programs back in the war on drugs, and they basically gave you more drugs to get you back in prison. So it is a thing where even it's a little bit of, it's just like a double-edged sword. It's like, well, you told us to go to our programs before, and we basically, you know, lost a lot of things in our life, even loan programs. There's a lot of things that we have done programs in our American government, and we're just untrusting of it. So when you call it a program, it is difficult. And honestly, I feel like, why are they blocking the people that have cannabis past convictions from getting licenses, from participating in the legal industry? They're the most knowledgeable.
That's what we've been saying. And I think for the southern states, the answer is clear. A lot of the incarceration time that these really small possession crimes have has put people behind bars for 5, 10, 15, 20 years in Alabama and in Tennessee and Georgia. And so when you spend 20 years incarcerated, even if you go in as a young boy, like, you coming out as a
grown man,
pretty gangster. I mean, real. A OG comes from old gangster, and you are now OG that has spent 20 years in the yard, in the place, whatever, and now you come out and your mindset is very different. What do you do? In most cases, you're not going to say, hey, I'm going to go be a teacher, or I'm going to go be a counselor. In some, yes, and I love those stories. But in most, you're going to figure out how you get that same credibility you earn inside, outside. And oftentimes that's doing further crimes. So we've created,
or joining a program.
Right.
Because you got to do that outside of prison.
Yes. But we've created a snowball effect of a pipeline to criminality by locking up people for possession alone, locking up young Black and brown men and boys for possession alone, and then putting them through a system that is very, very corrupt, from the people that are in charge to the, you know, it's prison yard rules. Prison yard rules is kind of no holds barred, right? We know that. And I mean, shoot, I feel like some parts of Brooklyn, when I was growing up, East New York, it was prison yard rules, because all that was done there just got brought back to the outside world. And then they give an excuse as to, oh, well, this is why we can hose you. This is why we can put the dogs on you. This is why we can now tase you. We can drop these bombs of tear gas on you. This is why we can shoot you with rubber bullets, and ultimately this is why we can shoot you with real bullets too, right? So it's all fed into a philosophy around the bird wants to be on the show too, but it's all fed into a philosophy around Black people and helping create this story around Black on Black crime, and us being able to constantly use that held against us. Right. When people, especially me, I say Black Lives Matter, I'm talking about all Black lives, and I'm talking about those issues too. And I'm trying to educate those people as well. But I think when we talk about the things that we have to be most careful on is how we are being deceived by various programs. And the intention is not really all the way there for what it is we need as a people. And I think some of these equity programs are like that. And it's no fault necessarily of a person who takes over the office, but we've got to do the work to fix that. Use this as a case study to say, hey, this is why we can't have it that they can only need to own at
40%.
Sorry, no.
Yes, absolutely.
Or add a rider to that contract that says there's no votes that can happen. There's no maneuvers that can happen without everyone agreeing, particularly the original equity approved applicant.
And and he's part of the license holder. You know, he went and did the application originally before any of y'all even got into the mix. So where you even coming from with this? But I definitely agree. And I tell people all the time, especially now I'm back in my hometown, I'm like, listen, this Black Lives Police brutality, Black Lives Matter movement is very parallel with the legalization of cannabis, because before the police stop you, smell you, frisk you, do anything to you, under the assumption you smoking cannabis because you smell like a terpene. It's my essential oil, thank you. But it is really because they are assuming you have cannabis, and because it's so easy to assume it and get away with it. And I thought they had cannabis, but they turned out to have a gun, so I shot them. Or their hairbrush looked like a gun and I shot them. Right. So it's so easy to go into it, and it's like it's more than just police brutality, and understanding that police brutality is a terrible thing. I agree. But there are a laundry list, and I've seen these lists people are creating, and not once do I ever hear about legalization of cannabis. Like, where we go get our
ignorance? It's our own ignorance. And that's why we have created a platform, and congratulations again for the award-winning platform that She Blaze is. But that's why you said we needed She Blaze, because it isn't being talked about. We had the Share the Mic campaign. I thought it was beautiful, where all of these women of color, all of these Black women were able to share the space or the Instagram of very prominent, influential, non-POC women. And the reality is not one of the influential Black women were people from our world or people from our industry that are actually doing the really unsexy work of dealing on the ground with trying to change laws that have actually contributed to a lot of what we see. Most of our negative police interactions are really due to a marijuana belief. And even there was a GOP senator not recently, and it was in a Marijuana Moment article that said, hey, George Floyd deserved to die because he was a marijuana user, and we think, and more stuff. So it is that constant story that, you know, oh, because you're using drugs, because that's one, drugs and globally, right? But marijuana specifically means that you are up to no good, and that means you deserve to die. And there are so many other, you know, consequences as a result. Even Breonna Taylor, she got killed because her that police force got a no-knock issued warrant, and that only comes with drug-related charges. They had a full-on militarized SWAT team come in, and again, that only comes with drug-related charges, come through her door, and they made further assumptions from there, and she was killed in her bed. These are the moves that, if we just take a step, yes, be horrified by what happened to her. I am, because that could be anybody. That could be you, me, because it was the wrong information, and they already had the people that they needed. But the reason that they had the money, and the reason that they were even that, like, suited up, is because of the story that we're telling around drug-related charges. And shout out to Cassandra Frederick, because she puts it all the way down all the time, the executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. But truth of the matter is, she's constantly saying it's not just marijuana, it's all drugs, and really drug-related behavior has been criminalized far too long. But specifically marijuana, of all the drugs, is the one of the few that actually is good for you. It used to be medicine, and it was purposely demonized, purposely to impact Black and Latinx populations.
Women was trying to have fun and enjoy life, and they're like sticks in the mud. So, like, come on now.
Too. I mean, everybody smokes.
Well, no, that is actually, that's how they got the laws passed, is because they put that as your women come down to the Negro area to dance and smoke and have fun and all this stuff that she doesn't do in the white area. But it's like, why y'all not having fun?
Of it, right? Because she does do it in the white area because white men smoke cannabis too. So that's what I mean by
exactly. Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So as we talk about these drug-related offenses and how the police have hyper criminalized cannabis, we also have to talk about the fact that when we have legalized cannabis and they're getting their tax revenues, when you see the breakdown, most of the money goes to the police force. Do you think they get re-educated on cannabis? Probably not. So I really think that as we ask about defunding the police, we should really talk about defunding the police and defunding their money that's coming from cannabis, because they really, I feel like they owe us money. They should be giving us a stipend for harassing us for all these years, and now it's legal, and we still giving you money to come and knock on our door and tell us we smell like weed. So
it's definitely a problem. I mean, there's several problems going on. So we started up, just to take people through it, why we started in markets without Black people, Hispanic people, because we are the majority incarcerated related to cannabis, although a lot of, diverse groups of people have been incarcerated. So that's the first hole. Then the next layer is once the market actually gets started, the price points are crazy because of the taxes, and so you have a lot of people who just don't want to participate because of that. The marketing isn't quite right, again, because you don't have a lot of diversity in your C-suite and even in charge of business units to make these decisions. And then people who do buy, if you are one like the fastest growing legal user, Black women are among that, women of color for various ailments, especially in medical markets. If you are one to say, hey, I'm going to try to do this because I ain't never really broke no laws, so now that it's legal, let me go ahead and get into this and try it. How disappointing is it to find out that you are paying all these high taxes, you're choosing not to go to your cousin's man's friend in order for you to get it at a much lower price and probably, maybe better quality, and going inside a store, not necessarily getting the best service, but you find that, okay, at least I'm getting it legally, only to find out that those high taxes are being funneled to the very units of government.
Canine units.
So it's just, to me, really insane when you tell the whole line of story, because again, it's circular. The money is going right back to the same people that are still in certain places. Medical marijuana is legal in New York. Sure, flower is not, supposedly decriminalized, but that New York Police Department is still picking up people.
They beating people up on the internet.
Absolutely. But again, it's circular. So we're going back to the main reason why a lot of these people are not in the industry and not even wanting to consider being in the industry. Shoot, it makes people not want to be consumers. And so as a businesswoman, where is it that you feel it is okay in any consumer product that you have to be worried about your client or your consumer leaving your store and potentially being arrested? Not at Target. If that was the case, we would be doing everything we could at Target to ensure that that did not happen. And so it's important that I think that cannabis businesses, whether Black owned or not, recognize that not having diversity, not having equity actually is the reason why your business is not winning. It's the reason why your market is not winning. At the end of the day, it seems so silly to even say it as it is, but if you are arresting, harassing, and using as an excuse a smell, I'm not wanting to buy it, so why would I go into a store and be even more so tracked on my purchase? So free up the lane for the incarcerations and the people of color and the experience. And that does start with figuring out where that money is going in the tax revenue and supporting it going to places that are going to make sure your consumers are actually healthy, happy, and able to buy.
Right. And they need to have clear instructions about what you're purchasing with that tax money. Yes, we're giving it to the police because it may say that it's education, but they're going out and buying SWAT gear. So there has to be some type of management that's not from the police force or bleeding blue that is willing to manage the process of where this money is going and how it's being spent, because it's just not right. And at the end of the day, I will always want to spend with my homeboy before I go spend at this random high price thing that is, like you said, not as good of a product. But diversity in cannabis is lacking, and we need more diversity. But we also have to figure out the markets that have a diversity in their state. A lot of these states are not as diverse as certain states along the southern side or certain states along the East Coast. So I believe that these markets that have Black and brown people, when you fighting for police brutality and police justice, you need to be fighting for cannabis legalization with you in mind, with them giving your money back to you and re-educating their police about it and releasing people from jail, because Georgia will lock you underneath the jail for a damn brick.
That's a very good point, and I know we really need to close out based on time, but what I will say is that we do have Black cannabis entrepreneurs that are stepping up and stepping to the plate to produce things to keep people accountable, to be part of policy oversight teams, and some of us entrepreneurs are moving to inside the government in order to make sure that we have people who are in charge of these programs that actually have cannabis knowledge, cannabis as medicine first from a scientific perspective, and not fear-based knowledge and street science. Or they have knowledge even of the legal system, like the sister who is in charge of San Francisco, a previous attorney, so that they can actually create and influence rules and regulation that will help for a thriving cannabis community. So that is definitely my goal. On that note, I'm definitely going to just tell everyone to continue watching our journey. I am the WeedHead, and you can find me and the WeedHead and Company at theweedhead.com. Can you tell folks where to find the rest of our army of folks who are, supporting this movement?
Well, congratulations to you being appointed in Portland. So we didn't actually even get to touch on that. This show goes by so quick. But you can watch us, She Blaze, on Facebook Live on Saturday mornings, and listen to us anytime on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. And make sure you subscribe to the WeedHead.com to stay what's blazing in the cannabis industry.
That's so dope. And just because you dropped it and I didn't say it, yes, I am moving to Portland, and I'm so excited to be working with the city of Portland to oversee its cannabis program. And, again, I pointed out where we have an opportunity to really create change. And this is that time, and this is that moment. And I look forward to doing good to create change. So I'll see you guys next week. I hope you have a great week, Ice.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.